Christ is a consciousness that underlies every atom of creation and ourselves. Who are true Christians are those who know that indwelling Christ. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I recollect that this time of year, towards the end of August, I begin to notice the trees beginning to turn color. Have you seen some, even right here as you drive in? And there's a kind of a melancholy as the light shifts and becomes a little softer as the sun moves south. You feel that shift in energy. And what I find, and all of our biggest programs start in September, and it's the traditional academic year, I find that there's a shift of outwardness into getting more focused, more, not serious in the negative sense of the term, but more focused on what's important in life. And I can kind of feel that shift as well. Maybe you can also. I want to welcome our two long-lost friends there, and haven't seen you in a while.
Ken and Jana. Can they stand so everyone can
Ken
see them?
and
Jana.
Welcome back for a visit anyway. So, you know, it's a strange, some of the titles to our readings don't make a lot of sense, cold turkey as it were. Who are true Christians? I don't know that many Christians anymore, so who cares who are true Christians, right? I mean, a lot of my friends are from India. They're not asking that question. Most people I know are agnostic, or at least haven't been raised in a particularly religious environment nowadays, and so they don't ask themselves that question either, nor do I. What it really means, or the context for it, has to do with the work of Ananda, the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda, and when a Hindu came to America long ago in 1920, the question was a lot more relevant because it runs to the essence of why he came, the essence of a new awakening of universality among truth seekers, maybe not among fundamentalists or dyed-in-the-wool types of East and West, but among people like you and I. There is an impulse, a desire, a knowing, really, is what it is, a knowing that there is something deeper that unites all of us. To that end, during the pandemic time when things were a little quieter and we weren't coming into the office on a regular basis, I wrote a book called The Once and Future Christ, and we'll do a book launch on October 14th and a study group class for the 4 weeks following that. But it runs very much to the purpose of today's topic, which is the need, the desire, the impulse to seek that universality. Yogananda was bold enough to even call his work. It always surprises me when I think back to the consciousness of America in the 1920s and 30s that he wasn't crucified. He called his work the second coming of Christ. And it's not like he said he was Christ, but neither did he deny it if anyone ever asked him. Actually, what he said is, what difference does it make? Well, I don't know about you, but to me it makes a big difference. And I'm sure to many people. But nonetheless, that wasn't his point. His point is that Christ is a consciousness that underlies every atom of creation and ourselves. I wanted to read a couple of passages from the autobiography of a yogi. This one is from, where'd it go? Why is it when you go to read something, oh, there it is. Whew. This one's from chapter 26, the chapter on the science of Kriya Yoga. And he quotes here the Adi, Adi means first, the first Shankaracharya. The Shankaracharya lineage in India is sort of as close as India comes to have a lineage of popes. They don't really think the way Christians or Westerners do in terms of authority or anything, but nonetheless, the Adi Shankaracharya, Swami Shankara, basically came into India as a reformer of Hinduism. Hinduism had been very much assailed by the rise of Buddhism in the first centuries. Although Buddha came in the BC era, it didn't really take root until closer to, the switch between BC and AD. And it was rising very strongly, and it was very needed for people in India. The philosophy of chop wood, carry water, as I like to call it, in other words, be here now, was very much needed given the overlay of priestly secrecy and rites and rituals, all of which many of us in Christian history are quite familiar with that tendency. And yet a great deal of confusion arose because that chop wood, carry water consciousness, as valid as it is for all of us, began increasingly to be more or less atheistical, as we find it can be even today. So Swami Shankara came to affirm not the personification of the spirit, the deities, and the millions of gods and goddesses in Hinduism, but the Satchidanandam, the ever-existing, the ever-present, the immortal, the omniscient, ever-blissful spirit that is what God is, both within ourselves, without, and in all creation. Yogananda quotes then the Adi Shankara in saying, outward ritual cannot destroy ignorance because they are not mutually contradictory. And that goes by extension in the fact that good deeds, virtue, all of the things that are valuable and necessary for our awakening are themselves not the goal. Are themselves, they cannot grant the vision of God. They cannot grant the upliftment into the higher consciousness that is our true nature. Wrote Shankara in his famous century of verses, realized knowledge alone destroys ignorance. Realization is not an intellectual affair. Realization is a state of consciousness. Knowledge cannot spring up by any other means than inquiry. Who am I? How was the universe born? Who is its maker? What is its material cause? This is the kind of inquiry referred to. Yogananda goes on to write, but the intellect has no answer to these questions. They are intellectual questions in the ordinary sense of their expression, but there's no answer for them. In the darshana, the philosophy of, I suddenly can't think of the name, but in one of the great systems of philosophy in India, there is an aphorism that says, Ishvara ashita, God cannot be proved. And having been given expression during this same era that I referred to, the interpretation was, of course, an atheistical or agnostic one. But the purpose of this statement was God cannot be proved by the intellect, only by the heart, only by the knowing. And so he goes on to say, hence the rishis evolved yoga as the technique of spiritual inquiry. Now, again, we have an issue because most people interpret yoga in its physical expression, but its true and deeper expression is the inner world of our own consciousness. And so it is that it's that in that experience of the stillness within us that we can answer those questions bit by bit. The other day while I was meditating, I recollected this little technique of turning your gaze within and ask yourself, who's gazing without? And of course, you can't really answer that question because stripped of any personality and attributes, desires and fears, it's no one, and in effect, it's everyone. But you know, the more rigorously analytical or experiential looking within is not the path for most people. But before I get to that, I wanted to read something that I've always found both amusing and instructive. It's in chapter 1, it's a footnote. And you probably have heard the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson in England. And Tennyson wrote in his diary, a kind of waking trance, this for lack of a better word, I have frequently had quite up from boyhood, when I have been all alone. Tennyson wrote, this has come upon me through repeating my own name to myself silently, till all at once, as it were, out of the intensity of the consciousness of individuality, individuality itself seemed to dissolve and fade away into boundless being, and this not a confused state, but the clearest, the surest of the surest, utterly beyond words, where death was on an almost laughable impossibility. The loss of personality, if so it were, seeming no extinction, but the only true life. He wrote further, it is no nebulous ecstasy, but a state of transcendent wonder, associated with absolute clearness of mind. But when I had the opportunity to go on a little vacation, a week up on the Cascades and along the Skykomish River, and did some rigorous hiking up Mount Index and behind, and swimming in the lake up there and in the river down below. And you know, it's always been a practice of mine. I don't have to be out in nature to practice it. I can be anywhere. But is the simple practice of gaze, I call it gazing. You look out the window, and without any internal narrative, you simply dissolve the filter of the mind, which reconstructs reality. You know, when I look at you or listen to you, I can't hear a thing, of course, but when our senses provide us data, as a scientist might put it, it's reconstructed inside the mind, and then it's analyzed, and we like it, we don't like it, and so forth. Our very life is vicarious. Our very life has very little to do with, quote, reality. And so when we can learn to listen to someone speaking without a parallel narrative going on about what you think and what you're about to say, when you can gaze out at a beautiful scene and simply be, this is part of deconstructing that which separates us from what actually is, whether we like somebody, our opinions, and so forth. I like to quote Jamana there many years ago, saying that the spiritual path doesn't begin until our opinions, when we realize how useless and are our own opinions about things. To me, what that meant was a recollection of my college years, when I realized, you know, when you're young, you have lots of opinions. Not that you don't when you're older, but somehow they're more meaningful or packed with emotion. Anyway, when I realized that whatever strongly held opinion I may have had on day one, by day two, dissolved into its opposite. And I realized, hey, you know, there's something going on here. There's someone trying to trick me. And so until we can let go of that filter by which we reconstruct reality according to our likes, dislikes, and inclinations, we can't really perceive what's true. Now, when we internalize that into the practice of meditation, it's actually much more difficult. But when we do that, the ability to literally be still is far more difficult. You know, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says that for those of us incarnate in a human body, those of us who are compelled to eat and sleep and live by food and water and so forth, sunshine, it's very difficult to be still and know that spirit. It's much easier for us to use our own tendency to send out energy, to internalize the energy, yes, in pranayama, but then to, in a way, send it out in devotion, in focusing our minds on the guru, or focusing our minds on the states, the aspects of our own soul consciousness, peace, love, joy, and the 8 attributes that we often talk about in our classes. And so, who are true Christians are those who know that indwelling Christ. Yogananda called it Christ consciousness. In India, they call it Krishna consciousness. I don't know if Muslims call it Muhammad consciousness or not. I've never heard that term. But it doesn't really matter. They're just words. Again, I remember reading once where, I forget where this came from, but it went like this. Teach a child the name of a flower, and that child will never experience that flower again. Because the name of the flower is that which separates us from the experience of the flower. And that's what we're trying to get back to. You know, whereas we go to school to learn things, the school of yoga is to unlearn that. We have a factory going on. And that factory, which is very creative, after all, we mimic the creator, okay? It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's through imagination, Sri Yukteswar said, that we either attract health or illness. How many times, remember back in the days when we got colds? Anybody remember that? And how many times, well, maybe I've lived longer than some of you, but how many times can I think back when maybe it was a very stressful time in life and a little inkling of a sore throat was coming, and in the back of my mind there was, oh good, I can stay home. I can call in sick, right? In other words, we embrace it to some extent, all right? Or for those who fear illness, which is a much greater number of people, like COVID, think back to the fear. I never really had that, but there was one moment. Steve's here. Steve, remember when we, well, maybe you weren't. That was when we moved. Never mind, Steve, you weren't there. I was thinking of that tremendous move that we made of the store, but this was the opposite. This is when we moved. Is Bhima here somewhere? When we moved the store out, because of COVID shut us down. All non-essential retail had to go, and our lease was up anyway, so we moved out. But I remember going downstairs to Whole Foods, and never in my life had I ever seen this picture. Padma had called me and said, can you pick up some lentils? Well, I can read the box. If it says lentils, I can get them. And I walked into this store. I've never seen this. The shelves were stripped bare. And for one moment, it wasn't anxiety exactly, but I really said, wow, what is happening? In any case, in COVID, it was amazing to me to watch, even in our own community, the wide range of responses to the whole experience. But fear was definitely uppermost. Then came anger and rejection and rebellion as well. But in other words, the extremes of reactions, as opposed to being centered and asking, how can I help? What can I do in this situation that our society and our planet actually face? Not what is my opinion, but how can I help? Not many people put it that way, quite honestly, even in a community of devotees. It was really surprising. And so it is. It's through our opinions. It's through our emotions. It's through our reconstruction of what we think is the truth that we live and die spiritually. There's a saying in India that I've always loved this because it's one of those tongue-in-cheek aphorisms. It says, it may be a good thing, perhaps, to be born into a religion, but it's a misfortune to die in one. And the tongue-in-cheek is to die in one, is to die spiritually, not what it sounds like. And so it is that unless we refresh our soul, our spirit, and transcend our opinions, our inclinations, our likes and dislikes, and have an actual refreshment in the baptism of pranayama, the baptism within. Are we really baptized and cleansed of the dross of our persona, our personality? And that's what a true Christian really is that suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. When little children were running to want to sit on Jesus' lap, as I imagine the scene must have been, and the disciples were very protective of his presence and so on, as we find in such circumstances, he said, no, let them come, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. Bless you.